Most musical sounds have an identifiable pitch. This does not, but this, and this, and this do. Some complicated sounds have many pitches at once, but for now let's just talk about single pitches. Pitch comes from the dominant frequency in the sound, the number of vibrations per second. Think of pitch as a line, going from low to high. We can pick a point anywhere on this line and call it a note. This is also a note. So is this. If a note moves up in pitch, we say it is getting sharper. If it moves down, we say it is getting flatter. Listen as a second note gradually moves away from the first note. At a certain point, the combination of notes seems to almost disappear into a single note. Both notes are still there, but when combined, they almost sound like one note. This special distance between notes is called an octave. Don't worry about the name, it's just a label. We think of notes an octave apart almost as being the same note in some sense. If you pick a note on the line, you can find the octave above it. You can also find the octave below it. And these notes have an octave above them and below them and so on. So you can start with a note anywhere on the line, and once it's chosen, the line of pitch divides itself naturally into octaves based off that note. Since we know every note magically reflects itself up and down an octave, that means that whatever music happens in one octave can be repeated in the octave above and below. So let's narrow our view to one octave. This octave could sit anywhere on the line of pitch. Divide the octave into 12 equal pieces. Why 12? Fascinating question, no time to explain. These 12 notes, spaced in this way, are the foundation of almost all melodic music on Earth. Between any two of these 12 notes are infinite in-between notes, but from this point forward, when I say note, I will be talking about one of the 12 fixed notes in the octave. Here are the 12 notes on the neck of a guitar. Each course of string in a piano represents one of these notes. Some instruments use complicated keying systems, but they are playing the same notes. With some instruments, there are no frets or keys, and it's up to you to find the notes yourself. Let's play through all the notes. Now, let's play some of the notes and leave the others alone. We'll include the octave notes and some, but not all, of the inner notes. We've created a scale. A scale is a selection of some of the notes between the octaves. Here's another scale. It sounds like this. There are countless different scales. You can make up your own, but there are a few scales that are most common. This one is called the major scale. Commit this pattern to memory. Don't worry about why it's called the major scale, it's just a label. Let's number the notes in this scale. Relax, this is not math. These are not numbers in the mathematical sense, they are just labels. Sometimes the notes are labeled do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We could have labeled them red, orange, yellow, green, or Alice, Bob, Carol, Dan. One tradition even uses shapes to label them. The labels are arbitrary. Note how the 1 is repeated. Remember, that's the octave, so the counting just starts over as you go up or down to the next octave. The 1 note is also referred to as the root of the scale. We could have labeled each of the 12 notes in the octave with a separate number. That would arguably be a more straightforward way to label the notes. Instead, we number the notes based off the major scale. But then how do we refer to the notes in between the scale notes? We borrow the terms sharp and flat. This note is not in the major scale. It is sharp of the 1 and flat of the 2, so we can call it either 1 sharp or 2 flat, and we use these symbols to indicate that. 1 sharp and 2 flat refer to the same note. The same is true for the other notes outside of the major scale. Notice that there is no 3 sharp or 4 flat, and there's no 7 sharp or 1 flat. This is just a byproduct of the labeling. There's nothing different about these notes. The notes that don't have a sharp or flat label are also referred to as natural notes, and you'll sometimes see the natural symbol next to them to emphasize this. Remember, there's nothing special about a sharp or flat note. They are just labels. Underneath the labels are always just the same friendly 12 notes. Any two notes right next to each other are said to be a half step or a semitone apart. Notes that are 2 half steps apart are said to be a whole step or a whole tone apart, sometimes just called a step. So far we've talked about notes in a relative sense. If I tell you to sing the 3 note and I don't give you any other information, you can't do it. It's like telling you to stand 3 meters from the starting line without telling you where the starting line is. We usually talk about pitch in a relative sense because that's how most of us perceive it. We can hear this major scale melody. We can then shift it a bit in one direction or the other and play it from a different starting point. It sounds different, but we recognize it as the same melody because the relative position of the notes is the same. But sometimes we use absolute pitch names, which refer to particular unmovable places on the line of pitch. These are the note names familiar to many as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Consider this note. It is labeled A. This is just like the notes we worked with before, except this one is fixed to a frequency of 440 Hz, meaning 440 vibrations per second. We can't slide it around. A is always A, assuming your instrument is in tune. There are, of course, octaves of A, and they are also labeled A, but their frequencies are fixed in relation to the original A, which is used to define the absolute pitch locations. We divide up the octave into the same 12 notes. These get labeled A through G like this, and the in-between notes get labels as well. Now with these labels, there is no B sharp or C flat, and no E sharp or F flat. It looks slightly different. Commit it to memory and don't worry about it. So how do these two worlds come together? Let's start by visualizing the line of pitch with the absolute pitch labels on it. Remember, these are actual, verifiable frequencies we can play. Let's imagine a ghost copy of the same line of pitch just above it, and on this, let's see our major scale pattern again. Now, this major scale can slide around anywhere on the line of pitch and it works just fine. But if we want to find a selection of absolute notes that matches this pattern, we just slide our scale down until the one lines up with one of the absolute pitch locations. Here we line the one note up with an E note. Now we can play the major scale again, and this time we are playing it starting on an E note. We call this the E major scale. We can list the notes we are using based on the pattern of the major scale. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, and E. Many seasoned musicians can spell a scale like this in their heads, and it may seem impressive, but it's not. The pattern is simple, as you've seen. Let's try another one, this time starting on C. This will sound almost the same to the ear, of course. It's the same scale, just from a different position on the line of pitch, but the spelling will obviously change. This time we get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. How about that? We didn't have to say sharp or flat at all. Some scales use more sharp or flat labels than others. The C major scale happens to not need any. This does not mean the C scale is special or primary or powerful in any way. And of course we can do this with any scale of any shape to find the spelling of that scale rooted at a particular note. We don't have time to cover all the other common scales, but let's talk about one called the natural minor. Shown here is the good old major scale. In contrast, the natural minor looks like this. It sounds like this. See how the third note in the scale is a 3 flat? Any scale with a 3 flat in it is called a minor scale. Any scale with a natural 3 in it is called a major scale. So there are actually lots of different major and minor scales, even though the term the major scale is always used to refer to the one we have already seen. Let's start again with the major scale. If we skip the 4 and the 7, we have a scale with just 5 notes in it plus the octave. This gets the dedicated name of the major pentatonic scale. It sounds like this. Remember, it is major because it has a natural 3 in it. The key of a piece of music is determined by the root note of the scale in use, and whether the scale is major or minor. Here's our natural minor scale again. If the one note of this scale was associated with a C sharp note, we would say that music played with this scale was in the key of C sharp minor. There are lots of ways to write that, but the most common is a capital C, the sharp symbol, and a small m. If we remove the 2 note and the flat 6 note from the natural minor scale, we have another 5-tone scale. This one also gets a dedicated name, the minor pentatonic scale. Let's say someone is playing the notes in the major scale, but they are playing up and down from the 6th note to the 6th note. They are only playing notes in the major scale, but if you walk into the room and hear them, your ear is likely to interpret the notes differently. The musician playing has tricked your ear into hearing the root of the scale as if it was at the 6th note. As far as your ear is concerned, the 6th note is actually a 1 note, so the scale your ear hears looks like this. In case you're having trouble hearing this, here's a background chord to emphasize this effect. If we label the notes using the same numbering patterns we label all scales with, you can see that what your ear is perceiving is a pretty different scale from the major scale. Coincidentally, this particular scale happens to be the natural minor scale we looked at a minute ago. This trickery is called a mode. By simply using the major scale notes differently, we get a different scale for free. The musician can create this effect by clever selection or emphasis of notes when playing, or by playing different chords in the background to guide the listener's ear. So a mode is just another scale. It's a shortcut. Once a musician knows a scale pattern on their instrument and in their muscle memory, they can easily play modes of that scale. You can make a mode from any scale you play, not just the major scale. Since the major scale has 7 notes in it, you can make 6 modes in addition to the bass scale. The modes of the major scale have special names like Dorian, Mixolydian, and so on. These are just convenient labels. Now that you understand the underlying framework of scales, you can go wild. Exactly what order you play these notes in is entirely up to you, and whatever genre you may be trying to conform to. When you approach a piece of music, figuring out what scale is in use is often a smart starting place. Find the root note by ear and go from there. It takes a little practice, so start with easy tunes. Once you find the absolute notes used in a scale, start thinking of them in relative terms, and understand the shape of the scale within the 12-note line of pitch. Thinking of the scale in a relative sense allows your ear to start recognizing what scales sound like, regardless of what key they are in. Part 2 will cover intervals, harmony, chord naming, and chord progressions. Part 3 will cover rhythm. I hope this video was useful to you. These videos do take weeks to produce, so if you have like 50 cents or $1 or $1,000 or $1,000,000, there's a link down there in the hoop-de-hoop for donations. Thanks.